All right, we are recording. Glad to have you here, Tim. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Great. Well, I'm honored too, because this is talking about subjects of material culture, tribal perspectives, seasonal rounds, all that type of stuff. I love it. I just booked a couple of speaking events down at the Montana Natural History Center just this morning for January. So I'll be doing some speaking there too on similar subjects.
Cool. Yeah, and we've been wanting you on for so long, and so it's really good to finally have you. And you and Annie are cousins, and I mean, we might all actually be related, which is all pretty interesting. And you and I are into very similar things. I love tool making. I love the natural world and how much it offers us and how much it teaches us just by engaging with it and building things with our hands.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
yeah, to just to start off, I wanted to give you the opportunity to let people know who you are. And one of my favorite ways to find out who someone is to hear one of their favorite childhood memories and how maybe that played a role in getting you to where you are now.
Yeah, I'd have to say there's many
Yeah.
childhood memories, but one that really comes to mind, it was just the other day, before the snow fell, I was walking near the house there, and I like to come into these areas where the deer have bedded down, and they've packed down all the grasses and things, and sometimes they're able to clear a little bit of the branch out of the way or whatever. And when I was a little kid, and I used to walk across the road from our house was the Rattlesnake Creek. So that was kind of my front yard. And then Mountain Jumbo was my backyard. And I spent a lot of time out in the woods when I was younger. But one thing I enjoyed was coming up to a deer bed and looking at it and just thinking, wow, how cozy that is. This nice little soft bed, kind of hidden a little bit, but also had a look out so they could see what was going on if they heard something. And it was one of those day beds where they would sit down and chew their cud and their digestive system, a required thing for the ungulates to do. And so it was kind of fun. I would lay in some of those deer beds. I would lay in there and kind of cuddle up and think of like I was a deer. How would a deer think about this? And a couple of times I fell asleep. So I was napping there in a little deer bed. And I woke up one time with a deer only about 10, 15 feet away looking at me. And I felt, oh, gee, I'm taking your bed. I'm sorry. And so then I got up and I started thinking, I wonder if I was dreaming like a deer too. I don't remember. So I wanted to do that again sometime. I haven't done that since I was a young boy. And I thought, I wonder if I could just take a nap in one of these deer beds. And I wonder if I'd had dreams like a deer too.
That's adorable, man. How old were you? How old were you when you did that?
I was thinking I was in Boy Scouts at that time too. So I was probably about 11 or 12, something like that when I was doing that. I was always in Boy Scouts and running around with my friends in the woods. I was always the kid that was finding the cool stuff, the fossil, the cool feather, the rock, the crystal or an antler, things like that other of my friends would kind of get jealous about and just saying, well, gosh, how come you can find all these cool stuff out here? And I said, well, I don't know. I just, and one person said, I think they come to you. I don't know. Whenever I'm with you and you always still seem to find the stuff and I'm with you and I don't seem to find those things. So, and I don't know what that is really. It may be a product of connecting with the natural world around me at a really early age. And I think the wandering around, I did a lot of that by myself too. And a couple of times, it is kind of scary being out in the woods by yourself. no matter how experienced you are in the woods, sometimes just those times that you're just like, whoa. Um, and I wanted to overcome that when I was a young kid, because I was always fantasizing about setting my own teepee up, being in the woods and living in the woods for the rest of my life. And I thought as a young person, I said, well, I can't afford to be scared all the time out in the woods like this. Why don't, start feeling more comfortable out here? And some of that was help, somewhat helping was my grandmother too. She had come up to me and she had talked to me one time after I came back from the Rattlesnake Creek, and my cousins and my grandma and grandpa was there at the house. And this is in Missoula, up the Rattlesnake Creek there where I grew up. And my grandma said, "Grandson, come over here. I want to talk to you a little bit." And so I went over to her and she says, "I noticed that you like being out in the woods by yourself." And I said, "Yeah, I enjoy that and things." And so she she said, "Well, I want to tell you this. When you're out in the woods out there, I want you to be aware of everything around you. There's so many things around you. I want you to be aware and I want you to be brave, because some of these things could come and talk to you." And I wasn't sure what she was talking about. And she says, things out there in the woods, they can start talking to you and they can start giving you your own personal medicine, your own sumesh. And so then I mean, my eyes were wide open, and this is the first that my grandmother ever had kind of shared that with me. And so she said, "You be brave. When they start talking to you, you listen and you remember what they tell you." And she said, "Don't run, don't scream, or just be there with them and listen." And she said, "It can be anything. It could be a rock, it could be a deer, it could be rain, it could be anything. You be there and you listen." And it was kind of funny because I reflected on that, and all of a sudden, the natural world around me, I got a little scared about it. I was starting to feel pretty comfortable, and then when she kind of was describing that to me, but it was a different dimension. Soon I started thinking about things that were alive around me and that they could start talking to me. And so ever since, I have that sense that things are alive around me because she said they were. And being young enough that you do believe in those things at that age. So I'm glad that I was able to listen, that she was able to share that with me, and that I've taken that with me throughout my journeys in the natural world. And when I reflect on that now, I think of that, well, that's basically how our ancestors, they did that. They really did do that, as she told me. And I understand some of the stories that have been told to me about individuals and their personal connection and to connection to the natural world around them. So I guess that's a long way around talking about my first experience out in the natural world, but there you are.
Oh, that's perfect. That reminds me of something one of my elders said to me, that one of the Blackfeet elders, he said that none of these songs, none of this medicine is lost, because it was all given to us in the first place. It was never really ours to begin with. And all we got to do is go back out to these places and spend time there praying and listening and paying really close attention, and these things will come back. So that's cool that your grandma said something similar, sounds like, to pay
Mhm.
very close attention. And that's probably how you're able to find a lot of that stuff, is that it's a whole nother level of awareness than just looking and trying to pay attention. And then even it seems almost like the harder you try to find something, the less likely you are to actually find it. Have you ever noticed that?
Yes, that's a really good way to put it. Uh, yeah, and I think I have another story that maybe as we go deeper into this, I would like to kind of relate to that. Um, a little bit more about trying hard and failing and not, and then letting yourself go and letting some of those barriers go. And then boom, it's there right in front of you. Good point.
Hmm. Yeah. So, like we said earlier, we try to keep this as conversational as possible. And Zoom is really a very strange technology for conversations. So, Annie, feel free to jump in whenever. And I mean, we're all bros here, pretty much.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking that. I was thinking back to when we interviewed Robin Kimmerer, and I think she had a similar story about how she got a lot of her information by being in nature. I think I remember her saying that she spent a lot of time outdoors, and then things spoke to her.
Mm.
And I think it's really interesting listening to your story. Is your grandma Annie?
Oh yes,
Okay.
that is your great grandmother, then, right?
And
No,
it's
that's your
what my grandma, yeah,
Yeah.
which I love hearing these stories because, she died when I was 3. And so I have little or no. And so hearing these stories is super wonderful. And I would love to hear more at a personal time later down the road.
Sure.
I mean, I would just kind of love to kind of hear just more about your stories, maybe about how you got into tool making. I had loved being at the bison range and seeing our wall of all the tools that you made out of bison. I see you have a bison robe behind you. Just kind of what kind of led you down starting with tools? I know you got into collecting things and wandering and being outside. At what point did you realize that you wanted to start making these tools?
Yeah, really good point. Well, when I was wandering around by myself, I was always picking up things, trying to make bows and arrows, picking up a stick and then just taking a shoelace and, tying it to it, bending it, and then trying to shoot things. Well, you know, so experimentation, just grabbing items from the ground and putting things together and trying to make it happen. And realizing that they weren't very effective tools that I was making at that time. But I knew that was in me, and eventually I will learn how to make some of the material cultural items of our ancestors, of our tribes. I think one thing that really kind of got me interested is when I was in 3rd grade, and we're at the powwow, the Arley powwow, and I told my mom, I said, "Mom, I want to dance. I want to do that." And she said, "Okay, well, you're going to have to learn how to sew. You're going to have to learn how to bead. You have to learn how to put together your regalia with the feathers and things like that." And I said, "Well, sure, let's do it." And so that turned out to be a really nice time between my mother and I at a young age, where she was teaching me how to do some of these real basic, somewhat domestic things like sewing and working with fabrics and working with dyeing some of the feathers, and being creative to figure out how to attach the feathers onto a bustle, to make a bustle, things like that. That really that challenged me to a certain degree, but I learned a lot from my mother, and I really I hold that dearly, that connection between my mother and I at that time. But one question was coming up all the time when I was sewing some buckskin together or something like that. I was using some synthetic thread and a metal needle, and I was wondering, well, how did my ancestors do that? How did we do this without these modern tools and modern supplies and materials? So that, I believe, that was my journey. But the beginning of my journey there was to start looking at our plants and our traditional materials that we worked with, our ancestors worked with in the natural world. And so I knew that I needed to start learning the plants. And so I got a plant book. This was when I was in Boy Scouts at about 12 or 13. And we didn't, our Boy Scout troop really didn't focus on Native American skills. It was more of just wilderness survival skills. And so it didn't follow through with the Native American culture. But I knew that I had that opportunity through my upbringing to explore that a little bit more. And so then I started exploring. I had a Pentax camera and a single lens reflex camera, and I started taking photos of plants. And I had a plant book, and I started talking to our grandmother, Annie, about it, you know, and she taught me a little bit about the plants, but I think the majority of my plant knowledge came later on in life. As that kind of started with Agnes Vandenberg camp, when a lot of my plant knowledge had started. But I started to explore that, and then trying to find as much information I could about our traditional tools. And at that time, there wasn't very much out there. When I was younger, there was a few books out there that I was able to look at, but I really wanted to make sure that it was specific to our tribes too. Sometimes these publications out there that you could find in the library were of either specifically Plains tribes or some other tribe that I was like, well, I want to know what our tribes, what tools did we make, what plants did they use, what rocks and minerals did they use from that, and so then that was the beginning of my cultural somewhat awareness of our traditional plants and such. And so then that was the beginning of my journey there. Another part of that journey was both my parents were really good with their hands, working with their hands. My mom was a perfectionist in her beading and her sewing. If it didn't turn out well, she would just rip it all apart and start over. And my father was really good with carpentry, woodworking, and just about anything. I mean, he could weld, he could do masonry work, he could do carpentry work. And so I do come from a product of two parents that are really that are creative, that also have artistic abilities and hand and eye coordination, things like that I do come from. And so it was a natural propensity for myself to pick up things and start to try to make something of that. And then plus being kind of all through my life an amateur naturalist. I love geology, plants, natural history, animals, wildlife biology. I was just always, fascinated by those subjects. And plus wanting to know what specifically what plants and animals that our ancestors did harvest, and then where did they get their arrowhead materials and their stone tool making materials and such. And because I was a rock hound, when I was in Boy Scouts, and that was a period of time where a lot of the Boy Scouts were jealous of the things that I was finding. And I actually did find some material that was some chips from stone tool making, but at that time I didn't know that was what it was. It was just a pretty shard of rock that had a nice sharp surface edge on there, and it was beautiful. It was nice and glassy and smooth, and so just observing the material itself and seeing that it was different than the surrounding materials, but not realizing it was something that possibly my ancestors had picked up and manipulated to make a stone tool. My cultural awareness of artifacts came a little bit, later on in my life, more like in my college days when I started kind of realizing that there are artifacts out there that our ancestors have left there, that is part of their heritage, part of the evidence of their existence on this planet is what they've left on this earth. And then that became then another element of my interest was what other kind of artifacts, what other kind of things are out there that our ancestors have left. And in some ways, through my work through the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, I started to kind of think, well, there was a reason why these artifacts are there. for one thing, it sparked in me um, a, a bigger sense and presence of our ancestors in the natural world, and it made it more concrete that, okay, I'm not just reading about it, and no one was just telling me about it. Now I'm seeing it. Now I see that artifact, that projectile point sitting on the ground, and realizing, wow, that's the tangible part of the existence of our ancestors that are still out there. And then I became more aware of wanting to learn more about those tools and about our ancestors through that material cultural items that they were that were left within these natural areas. And so then that then started me into more of the archaeological world and archaeological sciences.
That's
And
cool.
then after wanting to understand those tools that we are finding on the landscape, to understand how they were used, what they were used for, and what materials, where do they come from? If I wanted to reproduce a stone knife or an bow and arrow set, then where do I get these materials? So then that became another journey for me.
Is that about the time you met Dave and started working with Dave?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, exactly right, Luja. It was a time where all of a sudden this individual that was working with my ancestors' tools and things that they created, he was the one picking up and looking at them and documenting them and photographing, mapping them. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to know this. I want to know this stuff. And then starting to work with Dave and the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, then that whole world then started opening up to me in the sense of having access to the elders and talking to the elders about why is this site here? Why are we finding these tools here? Why are we finding the fire cracked rock and this rock pile, these teepee rings? Why are we finding them? And that became another dimension in my education, cultural education, was then working with the elders and asking them, well, why would we be here? Why is these artifacts here? And then what sparked that was then the seasonal round, is that they would usually, when we would take elders out to an archaeological site and asking, well, why here? A lot of times I know that the women would start looking around, well, the men too, but the women would start looking around and looking and observing the plants. And I remember Felicity McDonald saying one time, and I think it was down in Lolo, a place name that was entitled Place of Chokecherry or so. And she said, well, there's all this chokecherry here. I see it's in abundance. And when we have a place name like Place of Chokecherry, then that usually indicates an area, an abundance of that resource, and that it has the capacity to supply a large amount of people and repeatedly go back to that place seasonally on an annual basis. And so a lot of times those areas would be identified with a place name specific to a plant, or even like a fish, like certain resources and such. And so then place, they would say, well, what time of year were they here? Well, when the chokecherries were ready to be harvested. Oh, of course. So then that put a place and a time to their presence. And then that began the seasonal round with me, understanding what we did during the different seasons, during the different months of the season and such too. And then in my later years, after working with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, realizing that there is a specific time and place for these places for our ancestors to interact with the natural world around them. So place-based education became pretty important then. Why is this place important to us? Well, as the elderly men would be, they'd be looking at the trails and more of the topography of the landscape, while the women were looking at more of the plants that were there and why we were there. I remember Mike Durglow Sr. talking a lot about, well, you had a major trail coming here on this side of the river on the north side rather than the south side, because the south side would still be shaded by the mountains and there'd be snow on the trail. So most likely they were coming through here in the spring when the snow had melted off this trail. It was the only time they could get through this area. And they go, oh my gosh, we got travel now. here's Mike Durglow Sr. talking about seasonal movements on the landscape and how our ancestors use these trails. Now, a really cool story that Mike Durglow Sr. had kind of purported to me, or kind of a concept more than a story, was that we were looking at. I was talking to the elders at an elder meeting. We were talking about the Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discoveries and their movements through Montana. And as a matter of fact, Dave Schwab and I had an opportunity to map 3 sections of the Lewis and Clark route through Montana, through 3 national forests that we were contracted with to do. And I was giving a presentation to the elders, and I was showing them a photo of, let me see, it was a publication about promoting the bicentennial of the Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery. And it was entitled The Lewis and Clark Trail. And so then the elders were like, well, why are they calling it the Lewis and Clark Trail? They didn't make those trails. They didn't create those trails. And I spouted up. I said, yeah, exactly. They didn't do that. That was our trails. That was our Indian trails. That was our ancestors' trails, right? And then Mike Durglow goes, no, those weren't our ancestors. I mean, he said, sure, our ancestors used those trails. He said, but those were the animal trails. And I thought that was really interesting how that was more of an indigenous worldview. Not that was our view, our trails, kind of like ego. No, those are our trails, but no, those were the animal trails. And then we came and we were using their trails. He said, those animals, he said, you watch that elk go up that ridge and over, you'll see that he takes the path of least resistance. And he's going to take the easiest route through there, or the easiest route to the resources that are within that slope there. And so anyway, that was a revelation to me, of thinking that, wow, just that elder's perspective was more in line with our ancestors and their indigenous worldviews about where they're at and their relationship to animals and the plants and things around them. So then travel came up. So then the subject of trails started coming about, which was another fascinating subject there that we could go into at some time too, because trails connected you to all these resources, plant, animal, and mineral resources, which basically, as you guys know, those are the 3 categories of resources that our indigenous, most all indigenous people were looking for, or not looking for, but were harvesting and actively interacting with, was the plant, animal, and mineral resources and such.
So with seasonal rounds then, was there also within the gathering of food and gathering of meats, was there also gathering of like tool making, or how did the tools play into the seasonal round cycle as well?
Yeah, very good. So plants and animals, they can be specific to a place, right? Elk, of course, had an existence on the plains, in the lower valleys and things like that, until man came about and kind of pushed them back up in the hills, as did grizzly bears too. So there are the certain amount of ecosystems or eco zones and ecotones that certain animals and plants will reside in. And that can be dynamic, that can change over the years, it can change with climate change, it can be uh, uh, certain environments can uh, change, as in with the last ice age and stuff like that, that animals, plants have to change and move and such. But mineral resources were fairly set. They were in a specific place, pretty much. So stone tool making, as in chert and obsidian, mudstones, dacite and other quartzites, and other materials made, geological materials made, uh, uh, used for stone tool making or for paint pigments, or even medicines, uh, uh, things like that. Those were usually specific to a place. And so then within our seasonal rounds, our movements within our homelands and Aboriginal territories, there were certain resources within, okay, so the Aboriginal movements, our movements in our homelands would encompass all of those categories, the plant, animal, and mineral. And so mineral being somewhat specific to the place, sometimes those seasonal rounds centered around a mineral resource, or that those mineral resources were within that circle or that movement of that seasonal round. There had to been a stone tool making material there, because every year you had to retool. Your tools wore out, they broke. You traded your stone tools sometimes to other people. If you had an excess amount of lithic material to make your projectile points and such, you were using what you could, and adding extra, you would look at, well, this I can trade other people for certain resources too with that. And so so those areas became really, really important. Now, one kind of interesting thing too is that the dynamics of acquisition and harvesting of these lithic materials, stone tool making materials, changed from from dog days to horse days, if we want to classify pre-horse days as the dog days. We didn't move as much when we were walking. We could kind of perceive our existence, groups of people, bands of people, tribes, family clans or so, would be kind of relegated to a river or a hydro drainage, a hydro the river bottoms, river, like the Clark Fork River drainage. Sometimes that could be considered a Salish area specific. And so during dog days, pre-horse, we were walking, and pretty much might be able to infer that the geological basin of that river drainage up to the tops of those ridges of that basin would almost be kind of your boundaries in a way, that you could exist within that river drainage with most everything you needed. But it was the stone tool making material that might not be there within that, and that you had to travel to those, or pre-horse, you were probably trading with intermediary individuals in between those resources that had access to them, and then that you were able to trade with them for your stone tool making material. So bands, groups of people that lived close to these really major sources of materials, plant, animal, and mineral materials, those groups of people usually became specialized in the harvest and preparation and creation of some of those material goods that were specific to a resource in an area. So especially with, okay, so like stone tool making materials, if we take, for example, the eyebrow chert material that's south of Drummond, that was central to the homelands of the Kootenai, Pondere, and the Salish. All three of those bands have histories of use of that chert material. And so then pre-horse, the bands that lived close to that source became specialized in harvesting the materials, also in manipulating those materials. We find evidence that the chert is being heat treated, so that it was easier to form tools with. So heat treating is a real specific and a real skilled technique to modifying stone tool making material to make it easier to form tools. And so we find evidence of that.
Wow. So like when the heat treated, would it be the source, like the site, or would they be doing it with small pieces that they were going to work?
Oh, cool. That's a good question. We're not sure, but we find heat treated tools and chips and flakes far away from some of these areas. And so one signature of that Luja is that they'll have a pot lid, it's called, was what I understand through the archaeological science, is that all rocks, of course, they hold water too. And so when they get heated, that water turns to steam, and it metamorphosizes into steam, and then it pops. It actually fractures the rock with this signature dip, kind of like a little depression into the material, and you can. It's very signature, so you'll be able to pick that up too. Now, one thing that I've kind of noticed is in the later historic period, some of these tools are not as high quality. They're kind of low quality. They look like they're imbalanced a little bit, or they just don't have the quality as our earlier projectile points, knife blades. And I'm not too sure what the correlation of time. I'm just wondering if this was pre-horse. I was wondering if after the horse came about, the individuals, trying to get their stone tool making material, they were thinking, well, I have to trade with this one person because I'm not close to that source. I have to go through this person to get to that. Now if I've got a horse, I'm just going to go over and get it myself. I'm going to start making my own tools. And then what's a result of that is the tools are not, the stone projectile points are not of the quality of that original groups of people that were there working with it through generation upon generation. Here you have individuals that say, well, no, I'm going to do that myself. They go over there with the horse, they gather the materials. They may have learned a little bit, they may have done some, but then now we have artifacts that are in the more of the later period after horse that seem a little bit not as quality. So I'm just, as a question, I'm just kind of putting it out and through my own observations and wondering if that was a certain phenomenon that happened at that time.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. What timeline are we talking about here? Are we talking about the last 500 years you saw that? Or
yeah, well, I mean, the archaeologists will say it was the late 1600s is when the horse came about, that we had access to the horse here. The elders and the culture committee would put it as in earlier 1600s. And I have no way of really, I don't know if anybody, just through oral histories and some of the early observations by trappers and traders and other people who traveled through, giving us that indication of those time periods. But yeah, that'd be kind of fun to follow up on, if to talk to other people and to see what they think about that observation of that transformation of stone tool quality, maybe.
Yeah. So is from your experience, have you only seen the lower quality to be that recent, just the last 350 years?
It seems like, I mean, what I'm assuming that's on the surface of the ground is probably not as old as the stuff that's deeper in the ground. And so it would be kind of fun to look at existing collections and to maybe make that inference, to look at that hypotheses and if those collections are dated, through the archaeological study, then maybe we could make some sort of inference that stone tool making quality went down after the acquisition of horse.
That reminds me of this show that Annie turned me on to called Ancient Apocalypse. Is that right?
Mhm.
Yeah, in that one of those episodes, they're talking about these sites where the very first one that they built was extremely high quality, and but then as the thousands of years or hundreds of years went by, the quality actually went down, and that was a mystery to this guy. Is he's wondering how is that possible? If they're doing it in iterations, wouldn't they get better throughout time? And his hypothesis was that the original instructions they got were becoming more and more ancient, and so the people they learned this skill from became more and more into the past, and so that's why the quality went down. And it makes me wonder, maybe there's, because I know we all have our creation stories, I wonder if some of those original instructions is how we learned how to do this to begin with, and over the thousands of years, maybe slowly we got worse at it, which is kind of odd to me. It's a mystery. That's a really interesting. I wonder if there's anybody doing work on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. That is a cool concept too, that originating from their origin stories, and maybe some of that, yeah, that information is not being passed down, that there was a disconnect somehow or so with that. Yeah, I think I, I've got that too. I've got the ancient apocalypse, it was called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting.
Oh,
There
yeah.
are some parts where I'm like, all right, I don't know if I quite believe that. But I mean, he's got my mind thinking. I binge watched pretty much the entire season on my flight to West Virginia. So he had me all the way until Glacial Lake, Missoula. Then I kind of started thinking more about life after
cool.
that. But it was good. I mean, he I think he got the point across about thinking about things in a different light and a different capacity, which again, I think he was inferring, I guess, that these older teachers may have been extraterrestrial, which I don't know quite about. So there are some far-reaching things that in this show, but definitely some other brain teasers that got me thinking about archaeological sites. From, they talked about Serpent Mound, but then they also had sites in, what was it, Thailand and Mexico, where, I mean, spanning thousands of years. So it's interesting. I do recommend watching it. We are going to have a podcast episode just on Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah. So with the extraterrestrial stuff, are you talking about the impact theory about how Glacial Lake Missoula formed and broke, or are you talking about the civilization?
The civilization of people thinking that these pyramids that span multiple different continents have one source, that they're getting all this information, and that they call it, he calls it the lost maybe the lost people. They even talk about Atlantis a little bit in that, in Ancient Apocalypse as well. But the idea is that there was this lost people who went to continent, gave them this idea of structured pyramid styles, and going through each of them, and that's how they got their information. Which, I don't know, it would be nice to go to all these sites and kind of, with somebody like your background, Tim, and kind of get their opinion as well, because it does seem similar. You could easily fall into one of those theories about it being a singular group of people sharing information, but it spans the whole globe pretty much.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
It is that the pyramid and stuff. Which kind of reminds me too. I have an opportunity to go to Costa Rica through the college here to do for a STEM student research project. And I've been doing some research on Costa Rica, and they have these round spheres, these stone balls. They are perfectly round, and they don't know how they create these round spheres. And they're anywhere from softball size on up to 6-7 feet wide, and they're perfectly round.
Wow.
Holy crap.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I hope to see them too when I'm down there. And they have no, the indigenous people down there, I would like to talk to them. What are their stories? What are their origin stories of these spheres, and what were they used for? They were discovered when they started planting sugar cane, I believe, in Costa Rica there, and coffee. So they were clearing these fields, clearing the jungles of vegetation so they could plant them, and they came upon these round spheres. And so then eventually they ended up being taken, other countries taking them, and other people taking them for lawn ornaments and stuff like that. So the context of how they were arranged and put on the landscape was totally lost, which was really sad. But when I look at the photos, I mean, oh my God, they're just perfectly round, smooth. I mean, they have some of the texture of the rock to it too, for sure. But just amazing. And who knows? Maybe it is along that theory of these more ancient people that had that expertise, and that somehow our human evolution, we've lost some of that expertise, or those technologies, or that early ability to do these things.
Yeah, I think that was his main point in that show, was that there's this ancient civilization before 10,000 years ago that was at its height during the last ice age, and that there's this massive event, maybe astronomical, where we passed through this meteor stream, and there was an impact event that wiped them out, but they saw it coming, and so they went around the world and tried to seed knowledge of civilization in all these different places, so then their knowledge would pass on. And
Wow.
that's pretty trippy. That now I'm curious about what these round stones are, and why that knowledge is lost, and how long ago did they stop doing that. And yeah, definitely you're gonna have
Yeah.
to tell me about that when you get back, man.
Yeah, and then you got the Easter Island sculptures there too, where they're, you know, yeah, wondering why they were made, and how they were made, and things like that, and different theories and such. Yeah.
One thing that in that series they talked a lot about Serpent Mound, and in particular how the serpent is aligned with solstices, and certain parts of the mouth point somewhere. And what I've noticed is a lot of these ancient sites are really aligned to solstices, to equinoxes. It was again, I went on a kick for about a week where I was like, everybody needs to watch the show because I need to see everybody else's opinions on it. Because I feel like it's like a wide ranging group of people that's gonna take something out of this show. So I mean, I do recommend it, but it does get your mind turning on these really old architecture, and how in the heck, with no modern tools, were they able to get symmetrical. I kind of want to go to Costa Rica now, but the pyramids of Giza, you know, how straight those lines are, Easter Island, Stonehenge, all these really unknown archaeology sites are pretty impressive.
Oh gosh, yeah, Machu Picchu,
Yep.
this rock walls are just really amazing too. And yeah, I'm gonna start watching that Ancient Apocalypse now.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I really
was
enjoyed
engaged. Yeah.
I enjoy those shows myself. It gets you thinking, and such. And yeah, just that concept of these amazing things that they've created. And one thing, a phenomenon that's interesting to me, you're talking about, they're saying that there was these ancient people, and we know groups of people come and go, and things like that too. And they've also attributed like Clovis and Folsom cultures as groups of people that are different or distinct than the people today. And you wonder, well, there could be a possibility it could be the same people, right? But then, if they don't carry any of that history with them up to modern day, then do they have a connection or not? So it is kind of cool. It is interesting. If we go back to Alien, I know that Lucia, you were with us. Of course, yeah, you were there with us in Wind River.
Hmm.
on the Wind River Reservation when we did that archaeological survey, and we had some Northern Shoshone or what Eastern Shoshone
Mhm.
tribal members with us. And I remember the one individual said that there's the Dinwoody pictograph site. One of the individuals said that there is one pictograph there that they think it's a connection to alien life or alien beings also. That it is basically he generally described that it was a pictograph of these two beings reaching out to each other, and that there was a connection with that their tribe has with alien beings, and from what time period I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, there is that what is it, Sumatra, where they have the depiction of like a looks like a rocket ship, and then somebody that looks like they have a what do they call the things that go over your head
Like a
to help you
visor
breathe? Well, like a full
or a helmet.
like a helmet, yeah.
Yeah.
Within like these depictions, and that's said to be one of the oldest written languages that we have. And yeah, I would just love, that's like one of those things that when people ask if you could go back in time, I'm going like 11,000 years ago. I'm
Oh yeah.
going way back.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a lot of questions I need answered.
Yeah. In the very first episode too, there's a site where they've dated it to over 24,000 years ago.
Oh yeah.
And this is a huge pyramid structure, so it's pretty fascinating. There's so many I got left with so many unanswered questions on that show that I would like to know more. Like, why aren't they investigating this more? And it's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now that I put us on a weird tangent, one question that I have, I know that Ledger and I kind of started this podcast as I was a lover of podcasts. I think the Serial podcast, gosh, a long time ago, that led me down my podcast path, but we didn't see a lot of other tribal people. Now there's a lot of Indigenous podcasts that I highly recommend people listen to. But as somebody who has had a Indigenous based business, did you have any like challenges or difficulties getting it started or keeping it going with your business, Ethnotech in particular?
Um, I had various transformations of a business before Ethnotech too, where I had a business called Ancestral Skills and Technologies. And basically it was just dedicated to learning and teaching about making the material items of our tribes and such. And and so then that what got me in, kind of supported me with that was the Indian Ed for All grants that the schools were applying through the state of Montana. And so then I would do presentations in the school, and then the schools would then pay me to do that. And most of my show was the material items of our tribes, everything from stone tools to digging sticks, fish traps, and things like that, and bark baskets. And so then that came pretty easy. That was the interest was there by the teachers and the students to bring me in and to talk about these the material presence of our tribes, I guess you could say. And so then it was basically, I would talk to a school. I would even call up a school, and pretty soon they're like, oh, you do that? Well, gosh, can I write you into a grant? And so then they'd write me into a grant, and then I'd be going. And I almost made a living doing that for about 2 years, pretty much doing nothing but that. And I could see where someone could make a living doing that, but then a person could get burned out, I think, because you basically, when you come into a school, sometimes you're there for 6 to 8 hours, and you're basically on stage, and you're performing almost. You're talking, you're demonstrating these tools, you're even teaching them with how to make some of this stuff. So it was exhausting in that way. I was traveling throughout the state of Washington, Idaho, Montana, and doing a lot of the visiting schools and doing this. I could see where, like people who do certain gigs like that with the public, where they could get burned out by that.
Mhm.
And I kind of got burned out by it a little bit. I think if I had a team, it would alleviate some of the pressure off of me, or even a partner to do that work would have been a little bit easier.
Mhm.
But when Dave and I, when we were working with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, Dave was kind of talking about, we were both talking about our own business and how possibly lucrative it could be as if we were a tribal member-owned business. And so then we decided to do that. We agreed I'd be 51% owner and he'd be 49% owner, just legal enough to be able to call ourselves a Native American owned business. And it was thought that we'd be able to get a fair amount of contracts. But what we didn't anticipate is a competition from our own other indigenous business owners, and which is fine. That's great. Competition, I guess people say, is healthy. And but one element was that environmental firms they handle everything. They handle the streamside restoration. They'll handle the archaeological survey. They'll handle all the environmental things built around that. And so in order to get a contract, they would underbid certain things and overbid other things. Like they knew they could put more money into a stream restoration. They could bid more money for that than they could for the archaeological services. So they were playing a game of they could do everything, right? But they could bid less on their archaeological things and bid more over here. So we were getting outbid on our archaeological contracts because we were only archaeology. We weren't some of the other environmental sciences. And at one time we thought maybe making an environmental firm would be a bit more wise, hiring other people, but that became a huge management and logistical project where Dave and I had envisioned pretty much just having a small crew and cruising around, and also ideally we'd like to have other tribes hire us, which it did happen. Crow, Shoshone tribes, they hired us to do some work with them. But one interesting element of that was when Dave and I were in the 2004, 2000, early 2000s, mid 2000s, the quality of the archaeological work, there was a higher quality of that. The contracts were paying a lot more per acre, and the deliverables, which were the report that had to be written up, all the documentation of these archaeological resources that we're finding, documenting and mapping, a lot of that, the quality of that seemed to go down. And in our era of that was the product, the report was really important. And the agencies, federal, state agencies, were willing to pay more money for it. And I think there was more the tribes, when the Tribal Historic Preservation Offices first started being implemented, there was a higher degree of standards and qualities that were put on tribes to do. And then that kind of slacked off a little bit, and the tribes started doing their own thing. And soon some of that, the high quality report, elder interviews, things like that, to get down to really what's going on, the history, what's there in the ground, wasn't being explored or considered that heavy. So now I think we need to go back again to when Dave Schwab and I look at these reports that were being produced in these past, I would say 10 years, the quality of those reports have gone down, and the archaeologists of the federal and state have not put the pressure on these archaeological firms to do a better job. So that's kind of my opinion and Dave's opinion, and we need to start working with our culture committees to bring that quality of that archaeological surveys up.
So working in the field that I do, one of the questions I get asked a lot, and you brought up the Indian Ed for All, which is really a great thing in Montana, but they don't really have that for other states. And one question I get asked quite a bit is like tips for people who are non-Indigenous to incorporate either traditional ecological knowledge or what you talked about into more of their projects. How should people go about incorporating Indigenous perspectives in future projects or future education talks?
Yeah, that's the first thing I would say is to reach out to the local tribes within those areas that inhabited those areas, and that's not a guarantee, that they will be cooperative or that they'll share that knowledge. I know that the Indian Ed for All really put the requirements on a lot of education and that influenced other in museums, influenced other educational institutes, interpretive centers, things like that, that were pretty soon they were looking for those standards in Indian education. And soon that brought up their level of disseminating information about our local tribes to a higher level too. So it not only influenced the public schools, but also influenced other educational institutes within state of Montana, is what I noticed. And so what do you do exactly? If I know that there are grant monies to other, heritage type of organizations that are looking to bring that into other organizations. And I think it's the cooperation of the local tribes. Some of that buy-in from them can be as if they are included into that work early, and that they are included with monies to support elder interviews, money to support the research that they have to do within their own culture committees, and possibly follow-up interviews. One thing is that saying, is actually saying, this is an opportunity for the tribe to highlight those elders, to honor those elders, those knowledgeable people, and to bring them in. And I think on that basis of just saying here, we, like your organization, Annie, that's a federal organization, correct? And stuff. And so then they've got to have they have educational outreach, right? You are part of that, right?
Yep.
Okay. So then they can sponsor grants. I'm sure there's some sort of grant writer there. And then after you have you look at the different grants, you go to the local tribes and say, we'd like to have your knowledge included with the management of elk. Maybe you start with a simple direction of working with elk, and saying, we would like your cultural information that you feel comfortable with within this organization, so that we can highlight your presence and use of the elk here, your seasonal rounds and movements through here. We want to tell we'd like to help tell your story. And we are writing this grant. We can everything. I know that federal agencies will entice us with dinners, and different things like that, meetings, and build you up and come on, we want you to, be a part of our organization here. We'd like to have you come in, have speakers come in and talk about your tribes, your ancestors, your traditional use and your continued use of this area. We know that you use this area. That we still hunt and fish. Is there stories you'd like to share with us? So that, and most tribes, they want the public to know who they are and where they've been. I know that most tribes just don't like that, the ignorance of the community around them. And I think if we can, you can work in that avenue to kind of help build them up, build their story up and say, this is a good thing. We promote greater understanding of who we are between the public and you guys. And hopefully that relationship, if we can foster that relationship, that we can create a better world, you know, between you as an Indigenous peoples and the community, local community here.
Mhm.
And that's some ways that whenever I kind of am working with groups of people to bring that information out, to help them to bring that information out. Like I've done some work with that in Stevensville, in the Bitterroot Valley with some of the museums down there. They'll ask me, well, how do we get, you know, how do we start working with your tribe? It would be, you know, some of the same spiel I just told you. I said, well, let's talk about grants. Let's talk about monies that you can support them to come in and to speak. You know, pay them well, treat them well, invite them down for dinner, have a meeting, feed them well, and let's start talking about what they could share, what they want to share, what knowledge they have, and allowing them to back off completely. If they don't want to do it, then it's like, okay. And that's a hard one because I hate that. I want them their presence to be known, and I want to build them up, those Indigenous peoples up in those places, so that they have a presence in those communities and that they're respected.
Yeah. Did you participate in Yellowstone's 150th
Yes, I did.
event?
Mhm.
So Yellowstone has 27 kind of affiliated tribes that used or cultivated Yellowstone to a certain capacity. Kind of looking to where Yellowstone is at now. I just read this thing about the bison, and I'm curious to see how. I had talked with you a while ago about my master's and how we had a trail system from the Bitterroot area to Yellowstone. Can you talk a little bit about how you came about that knowledge of that trail system that we had? You showed me this really cool bison map. And I'm curious about how you got into finding those trails.
Okay. Well, you know, if you look at the topography of Western Montana and the Rocky Mountain areas, it's all mountains and valleys and such. And of course, we wintered in the valleys, didn't winter in the mountains. And there was a logical trail system that got you out of those river drainages again, out of, you know, over the passes and then into another river drainage. And so then there's a logical network of trails that are just there because of the topography. That's the most likely way that you're going to go to get over into Idaho is Lost Trail Pass. You know, something like that. There are those logical. If you think of water flows a certain way, and the topography lends itself to that, and so then the trail systems would follow that to a certain degree, the path of least resistance. And so connecting these river drainages that have these cultural resources specifically within that river drainages, Yellowstone, eventually, you know, the caldera, that was a huge basin created by a volcanic type of activity there. And so, and it's also a little bit higher elevation than the surrounding environments. And so, if you consider a higher elevation, you most likely most of the tribes did not winter in the Yellowstone area, except for the Bannock or the sheep eaters they would call. A fair amount of them did winter in the Yellowstone area, but it was mainly considered more of a seasonal movement into the park and then coming back out for the resources. And so I suppose my knowledge wasn't specific to trails, it's more specific to the fact that the elders said, yes, we gathered our obsidian there. So then it came about, oh, okay, then what was the most logical route that got to that obsidian. So it depends on where you were coming from, right? Where was your wintering ground? Well, let me see. If you wintered in the Missoula Valley or the Bitterroot Valley, then you had a logical route that came from there to Yellowstone. If you were the Crow and you were on the Yellowstone River, you're wintering on the Yellowstone River, then your access to Yellowstone would have taken a logical route too. So you could actually plot that out. You could say, okay, this is the path of least resistance. So most likely this is the fix and the easiest way from point to take. But that's an inference, right? I'm just inferring that because the topography lends itself to that. They could be movements in a huge circle. They could be coming back on the back side of Yellowstone that we don't know of, and then going straight through Yellowstone and coming back to their homelands or their wintering grounds. So so that's really interesting. Okay, so there's a coyote story too that talked about coyote distributing lithic stone tool making, and it mentions going to the Yellowstone area, and I think they were coming from the Bitterroot, and it said it took coyote like 5 or 7 days to get there. So then I was wondering, I wonder if I could figure out from the Bitterroot Valley how many 5-6 days to get to Yellowstone, and what was that logical process getting to that, or what the logical trail system getting to there. So I thought, wow, here's a story that may be lending a route to, a pathway to there, and how many days would it take? So I don't know if that answered your question.
Do you think it would be possible in 5 to 6 days? Is there a route that you found?
Yeah, I think so. I really do, especially with horse probably. But if it's coyote story, it may be pre-horse to that effect too, that it may be walking. So then it just depends on where they're wintering. If they're wintering in Sula down in Ross's Hole, which is at the very tip of the Bitterroot rather than Stevensville, then maybe, so then you got to infer where they were going to start, where they're starting from, and what Coyote was talking about, where he was starting from in his story. But I think there's some of our Coyote stories and other stories. There are probably instructions that helped us to find these places through story.
Is there any tool? I'm going to throw you in hypothetical. If you were to do this 5 to 6 day travel we'll be on a horse, is there a tool in particular that you would for sure bring, or is there a tool along the way of that trail that you would be making?
Interesting. To Yellowstone, you're saying?
Right? To Yellowstone, yep.
Yeah. I think there would be, elk antlers.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were used as chisels. They were used, the rosette of the base of the antler, they were making a chisel out of that to get into quarry sites for pulling material out of, any kind of stone material. I believe that some of these chisels were found in archaeological sites when I think it was on the Ted Turner Ranch, the Snowcrest Ranch, where Dave Schwab had an opportunity. When he was working for the state of Montana as the archaeologist for the state of Montana, he met Ted and Ted Turner and the famous actor woman. Anyway, his wife at the ranch. And anyway, there was tunnels in rock that went back 30, 40 feet they tunneled into rock. They were hard rock miners, basically, our ancestors were. And they found antler chisel, remnants of antler chisels. And so basically what they were doing is taking a hammer stone, taking a large stone, putting in their hammer, and then finding a crack, and then taking the elk antler chisel and hammering it into those cracks to dislodge some of the material. So, wow, all those antlers in Jackson Hole there.
I know, that's what I was just thinking. I mean, look around, all of the arches around here are collected from the the refuge.
So,
Thousands.
right. So that could have been one tool that they were acquiring along the way before they got to there. And then plus fire was used to dislodge the stone tool material too. You have a vein of that material, and say you just can't get into a crack there to dislodge anything. You build a fire up against that material. Of course, heat, expansion, and contraction of that lithic material is going to create cracks. It's going to stress it as it expands, and then it contracts. It's going to stress the material, and cracks will happen. And then dislodging those materials, and then working with it is one method of extracting the chert material, which was evident of a quarry site.
Uh-oh. Lost Tim there for a second. Looks like you're coming back in though. Good old internet.
I know.
Doesn't look like we lost him totally, so let's wait a second here and hopefully Tim's stuff will recover. And I was just thinking like, wow, so the rosette, and because I'd heard
Yeah.
about that, and I'm just curious about the rest of the antler. They took off how they would form that tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, well, maybe I'd bring a jackhammer.
Well, I know with like our digging sticks, I think I would like to ask Tim more about it, but the handles I think are made out of antler tines, the tips of digging sticks. So I kind of do want to, I have more questions. So hopefully he does pop in. And I am taking notes. So if people are looking why I'm looking down, I have a big notepad of me taking notes. So don't be alarmed if I look down.
I was super alarmed. I was like, oh my God.
I know.
What's
Well,
going on there?
now that we're
No,
recording and
I'm
posting
messing
stuff
with
too, I'm like, oh gosh, I got to make sure people don't think that I'm not paying attention. I just, every time I have a conversation with Tim, it is nothing but me learning more. And it's so fascinating.
Yeah, likewise. And although him and I are into very similar things, he's got so much more experience with tool making than I do. And yeah, I had a couple of questions for him about his, like, so I know he's made lots of baskets. He's done lots of work with the digging sticks. And so I was curious to ask him what his favorite tools are to make, and if that's different than the favorite tools to use. Because I know some tools are a pain to make. Also, some aren't. They're pretty quick and easy. Like a digging stick is pretty easy to make, but you gotta make it right. Otherwise, it's not gonna work properly.
Yeah, one thing that I have when I was at the bison range, and I think it's still up. So if you're around the area, I would go to the bison range visitor center. Tim has a bison horn cup. He has a a large parfleche. He has, I believe, thread and a needle and a basket still at the visitor center that he made or helped make. And it's just a wonderful use, and does let people, if you're curious about how all of parts of the bison were used, very much clearly explain with the tools that he makes. And I highly recommend going to there. And they've updated their visitor center. So if you haven't gone yet, go. It is lovely.
Yeah, I haven't been since it's been I think last time we went there, they were in the middle of remodeling and stuff. And I've always loved that place. Just as a kid, just going in and looking at the dioramas, and there's the videos that would be playing and things like that.
Oh my gosh, the old video where it's like this, we stopped playing it when I was there, but it had the stereotypical 1800s country music. Well, I guess probably 1900s, the John Wayne music where they're riding in on their horses. It was very, very country, I guess.
Country. Well, that's unfortunate. We were able to get quite a bit from Tim, and I was also just thinking that's pretty cool that he started getting these ideas while he made his first outfit. And I
Mhm.
wanted to know, do you know, was it a traditional style or is it grass dance or?
Well, I'm assuming bustle, probably traditional, because I don't think we really started prairie chicken
Oh yeah.
until later. And so I would assume traditional just
Okay,
with
that makes
the
sense.
bustle.
I should have been paying a better attention.
And I think it's so Tim's mom is my aunt, and I never really talked to her about beading, and now I'm really wishing that I would have spent more time talking and learning to her about definitely sewing and definitely beading. I was kind of the only one in our group in our family to still bead, and would have been awesome to talk more with her. When I go back for Christmas, I will be talking
Okay.
with her.
So Tim's his computer died. He didn't have his computer
Okay.
plugged in. So that makes sense. All right. He said he's gonna try to reconnect now.
Okay.
So you and I
Yeah.
we can BS for a few minutes.
Um yeah, I'm really glad. We had all these questions written out, and Tim in his fashion has definitely touched on all of our questions. So
There you go.
All right. Sorry about that, guys.
It's all
I,
good.
yeah, my computer was not connected. Anyway.
I've done that before many a times. The very first, I was so out of practice with our first podcast, I didn't turn my microphone on. So the only thing that was catching was my either my computer audio or my headphone audio. So it takes us a while to get back to technology.
Oh
Even though
yeah,
I've been forced to use it.
modern technology, complex technology. The more
Yeah.
complex technology gets, the more likely it is to fail. And when it does fail, it's more likely to be catastrophic failure. That's why this kind of stuff has always been so fascinating to me, is knowing how to use this primitive technology is so important, because when, for example, your knife breaks, it's not like you got a grinding wheel that you're going to be able to go and fix your nice K-bar on.
Yeah.
Or sometimes if it actually snaps, you really need something with a point sometimes, and being able to fashion your own cutting edge is
Mhm.
so critical. And to be able to make your own rope and your own baskets and your own digging sticks and things like that. And I was really interested to hear that some of your first inclinations to making your own tools came from making an outfit. And I was curious, how many years did you dance for?
I danced up until 8th grade, and then going into high school, my attitude started happening, and I thought, oh, that's not cool anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and but I sure regret that. I would I should have stuck with that. And I think to a certain degree, if my more more if I had more encouragement by my parents, maybe I probably would have stuck with it a little bit more. Maybe if we were more, I grew up off the reservation. I think maybe if I grew up on the reservation, maybe with more friends that were doing it, more, it would have been more like, oh yeah, no, it's still cool. I want to do this, where where being off the reservation, and then my friends in high school, that wasn't even a concept, it wasn't even there. And so then it was like, oh, this isn't cool anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. But no.
Mhm. Yeah, isn't
I
that
usually-
funny? Like everything about being a teenager seems to come down to being cool. But the funny part is you would never admit that as a teenager. You would
no.
never admit
No.
that you're trying to be cool, but pretty much that's what everything you're doing is all about. I remember that. And Boy Scouts too. That's something that I wanted to do when I was a kid. And I don't remember there being any Boy Scouts around growing up. And I grew up in St. Ignatius and Ronan and stuff. So, but there probably was. I think maybe my mom was hiding it from me because she didn't want me to be in the Boy Scouts. And
Well,
that's interesting.
yeah. Well, what I know of, even I think in that day, that your era too there, Leja, was that they were still, seemed like, I mean, the Mormon church was kind of taking over a lot of the Boy Scout organizations. And, I hate putting it that way, but I know that our scoutmasters were not of any religious denomination, and they didn't focus on that. They were more focused on getting us out into the natural world around us than adhering to any kind of real major philosophy of what the Boy Scouts were. But I do have to admit that the Boy Scouts did promote a certain amount of civic responsibility to the community. That was pretty interesting, that I carried through with myself as a young boy. Engaging, it was the fact that you engage with your community, your civic duty in the sense of even voting, helping out your neighbor, being a part of the community and things like that. I thought that was pretty strong, and that follows through with Indigenous worldviews that way too. But I only reflect on that now. I didn't reflect on it then, that's for sure. But yeah, trying to be cool.
I had no idea that the Boy Scouts were any type of religion until just like, I would say like a week ago.
Okay.
That part of God is brought up in the pledge that you take for Boy Scouts. And
Yeah.
I did brownies, which was like pre-Girl Scouts, and then that was it. Didn't do anything past that. But I have a friend here, and she started a Girl Scout troop, and that was one of her requirements, that it is non-dominational, just because it's kind of hard to assume people's religious status or make them kind of pick one, and that's what they go with. So I had no idea, but I was, the Boy Scouts, I think, have been in the news recently, and so it's good to hear that you had an experience of connecting to nature and your civic duty, when I think right now you do hear kind of the negative side of the Boy Scouts.
Yep. I'm almost sometimes I don't say I was in the Boy Scouts because I'll get the laughs and the sneers,
Mm-hmm.
that too. And it's like, okay, well, but it was influential with me, and on a good level.
Nah, the Boy Scouts, that's totally cool, man. I still want to be in the Boy Scouts. I'm too old though. I don't think it'd look good for me showing up.
Yeah. Oh, you'd be a great scoutmaster there.
Oh yeah, I'd get all the patches like within a week.
There you go.
Yeah, and I'd be done. Yeah, so it's really interesting to hear. And I've heard a lot of this already, but to make these connections, how you and I have a similar journey where we taught ourselves a lot of what we know, especially with the plants. And that stuff, I didn't really know that it was important growing up, but there was something deep down where I was just fascinated by it. And I couldn't stop going in the woods. I couldn't stop going in the mountains. And I'm really fortunate my mom let me do that. From a pretty young age, she didn't really seem to care where I went. And I'd be gone all day. Even though we lived right there in Indiantown in Mission, I would just get onto Mission Creek and follow it all the way to the mountains. And I'd be gone all day and come back with a bunch of fish. And she was glad for that. But she never asked me where I was going. She didn't ever seem to worry. Whereas now, if my 12-year-old son disappeared for a day up the creek, I'd probably worry about it. But that's the thing is, I think partially it's competence. I think in a way she knew I was more competent, and I know my son is not competent with that kind of stuff. And that's partially my fault. But at the same time, like I didn't have anyone teaching me that stuff either. So I think it's cultural and societal. Like we've overcoddled our kids, and now we got to let go of them. And I'm working on that, letting my kids just go out and play and disappear into the swamp for a day.
Yeah, I agree with you totally, Lucia. Yes, we do have a similar upbringing in that way too. I look at some of my grandkids, and actually they're my wife's grandkids, but there's two of them that live in Seattle and two in San Francisco. And boy, yeah, they're coddled.
Yeah.
They're when they come up to our house in Montana here, uh, they don't want to get dirty. They don't like dirt. They don't like that. And I've had even one of the mothers tell me to back off a little bit because I
Oh,
wanted to
wow.
try to get them into it. I said, come on, let's do this. I said, no, 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 they don't want to do that. Don't make them do that. And I said, okay, well, I just kind of want to give them the opportunity,
Mhm.
you know, at least give them an opportunity to make that choice. In some ways, I kind of felt that their parents were making that choice for them. And so then they conditioned them to hate that, to not like those areas. And so,
Mhm.
and I don't think we never had I don't think, you know, so our, you know, your parents, my parents did not promote, they, right. I mean, they didn't really tell me to go out in the woods, or they didn't tell me not to go out in the woods either. And I think what I'm seeing with my grandkids is that their parents are telling them, no, don't go out in the woods, which is
Mm,
kind of a sad thing.
yeah,
Mhm.
that is sad. That's really sad. And I think deep down, it's a part of our soul. I think deep down their soul wants to get dirty. Their
Yeah.
soul wants to have dirt in their hands and under their fingernails. And it is a perception thing. And there's a lot of evidence that this started in the 90s because there was a serious problem with crime in the early 90s, late 80s, and kidnappings. And then that's when Dateline started doing its thing. And I think it scared the crap out of most Americans. And when we grew up with that, and then, but now that we have up until 2020, at least, there was a decrease in crime and a decrease in violent crime, especially. And that fear never went away, though. And so there's a great book that I highly recommend from a guy named Jonathan Hyde, and it's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he
Wow.
talks about that a lot in there, how there was this coddling that happened and that we never let go of it, and even after the danger was gone.
Wow.
And he also talks about social media, which
Mhm.
is another interesting aspect of that. And tools, so much tools, like your computer just pooped out on you. And again, that's why having these kinds of skills is so empowering, is because deep down, when you know how to do this stuff, you have so much more confidence in yourself
Mhm.
and in life in general. And so that's why I
Mhm.
think deep down kids really do want to learn this. But yeah, it's a
Uh,
tough thing.
yeah, that's the word confidence. I like that, what you said there. When I reflect on what my grandmother was talking about, being brave, being present with these beings that are starting to talk to you, is that you have to have a sense of opening yourself up to those energies for it to be
Mhm.
present with you. If if you are constantly in the woods, scared, thinking about what's around that tree, what's, you know, what that noise is, that you won't be present,
Mhm.
to be present for that energy, for that connection, or for that interaction with that being. And so being in Boy Scouts at an early age, going out, you know, like you, in the woods all day, gave you that confidence, and you were competent to go out and do what you were doing. And the more and more that you feel comfortable in these natural worlds, the more easy for that energy to transfer to you, and that connection. And so it is, so in fostering our traditional perspectives and ways and traditional ways of being, then we need to start early with our children to get them feeling comfortable and competent, and
Mhm.
having the confidence to go out in the natural world and be out there for hours upon hours, for that energy to be, you to be with that energy, and to cultivate it and to benefit from it like our ancestors. And so I think that's one of the biggest lessons we we come away from our modern day life, is that we're not giving our children or even ourselves that opportunity to interact and to, for that energy transfer between these beings that are out there. and us. And that indigenous world being that all inanimate objects are alive is part of that. And so, yeah, we need to interact more and to accept that and to help our children to be part of that.
Yeah, and I can imagine coming from San Francisco or Seattle too, where you're into that urban city style. I get a lot of people who, of course, when like we want to go hiking, and it's like, okay, well, have you been in bear country? Do you understand hiking and being bear aware? And the panic that comes across their face, again, talking about
Yeah.
confidence and them clearly not being confident in any
Yeah.
type of wildlife. Really, I think starts with you as an adult sometimes kind of taking that first step, but also it should show you that your kids are scared of being outdoors. And what does that mean if they're scared to be outdoors? Talking with Haudenosaunee people who believe that there is an apocalypse, what's going to happen if you don't have these modern technologies and being comfortable outside. I have loved seeing families coming outside and wanting to do like short hikes with their kids, really willing to learn, but it has to be at that point, especially if you live in an urban area, it has to be like a family adventure style where you're all getting comfortable being outside. And I would say do not want to hike if you're not comfortable with bears. It's one of those that you really have to be comfortable with hiking. And I know that when I take Esther outside, I talk to her about plants, and I hopefully help her be a little bit more confident out in the woods. But it is tough when you have a lot of people who live in these metropolitan areas, and having them connect outdoors, like you were talking about, Tim, in a deeper capacity, so that they're actually listening and they're seeing all of the beautiful animals and birds and plants and the rocks and the streams and the river and the mountains. And they're not just getting the kind of Instagram photo, it's building a deeper connection, which I have noticed it's more about the photo opportunity than it is about getting out into that nature.
Yeah. Cultivating that that experience, or cultivating, that what can I bring back home with me in a way?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like, well, that's superficial in a way. Yeah, it's not looking for something deeper.
Mm-hmm. Which is a challenge. I'm going to spend the rest of my life probably figuring out how to help people connect at a deeper capacity where they're not scared. And it's not just for the social media post either. I know that before you cut out, one of the other questions, which I'm super curious about, as I have the chance to get a lot of antlers, and you were talking about the elk antlers. Is there any other part of the antler that was used, or did they kind of find spikes for the tools, or how was the other parts of the antlers used?
Oh, good. Yeah, here's the digging stick, and it was usually an elk antler tine that they would cut off and then drill to put your wood shaft into.
Uh-huh.
And so then there's a major use of that. And then they would take the whole elk antler itself and make a digging stick from it.
Okay.
So there's I have one that I don't have it here, but it had a nice alignment of the main route, or the main stem of the antler, and I cut off the certain tines, and it had a curved, of course, bottom of it was curved, and it worked out pretty good as a digging stick itself. I've also read references to an elk antler axe, and I'm trying to figure out what that was, an elk antler axe. What I'm thinking it might be is that, I wonder, do I have, I think I might have an elk.
That sounds cool. An axe.
Yeah, now I'm wondering, I can't envision it. I'm without having multiple parts.
Yeah, so
yeah, I can see that.
okay, so what you could do is you could cut off a point here. You cut that off, and you could have like a chisel end on this point, and farther down, you have the handle, and you could be hitting against the wood with that part of the antler there.
Wow.
There's reference of making the chisels, which they of cutting down a tree or cutting into a tree with a chisel and a hammerstone and cutting around it, and so elk antler chisels were used to cut trees down.
Wow.
In woody material. So that's kind of cool. So I'd like to make one of those and experiment with that sometime.
I mean, I would help you experiment too. I have
Yeah.
a fireplace and I would love to make my Kinder a little smaller. I could try that. I'll be willing to try it. I have a ton of antlers I could get.
Oh, I bet you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do some research on the elk antler axe, because I haven't found anything on it yet. And I've heard reference of that. And so I'd like to see if there's any, I don't know if there's any museum, specimens like that around, but yeah.
Their tools are fascinating. There was another one where I think it was the sheep eaters, where they would soak the bighorn sheep horn in the Yellowstone geothermal areas, and it would make it flexible, and then that's how they would make their bows, which I find very fascinating.
Yeah.
Just the intuity to have that idea and to really master that craft.
Yep. You can shape bone too. You can shape antler and bone by heating it up and making it heating it up and then manipulating it and bending it and stuff like that too. Marcia Pablo, who was my supervisor when I was at Tribal Historic Preservation Office, she did her thesis on the Salish hornbow.
Ooh, okay.
And she mentions that some of the same techniques of our Salish ancestors making the hornbow that way too.
Wow.
And the use of the hot springs. And then there's a lot of a lot of scrapers and bowls and spoons were made from the bighorn sheep too.
Okay.
And they talk about a scraper that scrapes the cambium from the scarred trees when they remove the bark. One of the traditional scrapers to take the cambium off the tree was a bighorn sheep. Wow. And it was shaped and formed so it would pull the cambium off nice and easy.
Wow.
So for the horn bows, do you know what they used for glue to get it to stay together?
I think even you can like the hide glue or the hooves, and you can even boil down antler, pretty much down to a glue too.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
yeah, I've heard that.
Yep. So you can use you can boil down raw hide. You can boil down hooves, horns, and you can make the glue out of that.
And that's exactly what Mongolians did.
Oh, really?
Use hides and all. Yeah, that's interesting. And they also use horn to be able to make their recurve bows, and it's still arguably one of the best bows in human history.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff.
It really is.
And I knew there was a subtitle to this book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and the subtitle is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure. And that's right in line with what we were talking about, how there is something to be feared out there. It's definitely dangerous. And there's grizzly bears down in the creek, and a part of why I was confident was a little bit of ignorance. I just had no idea how dangerous it really could be. And I was just out there having fun. That's really all it was, is just having fun. And then I'd learn through experience and sometimes close calls. Yeah. So have you ever had any close calls with bears before?
Yes, I did. I was enjoying my day. I was hiking up on this ridge. It was Charity Peak, as a matter of fact, in Evero area. This ridge had been clear cut one time, and then there was all these little young pines that were up to my chest, growing. And why I was in there. I'm not sure why, but I just kept on cruising up this ridge. And then about 200 feet away from me, two cubs ran up a tree. So I was like, okay, mama's around here. Soon she stood up trying to find me, and she smelt me and then was looking at me. And then I stood still there. And then she went down into the trees and started coming towards me. You could see the trees going back and forth with their path toward me. So then that was a cue to me to move, because she couldn't see me. She could just kind of generally know where I was at. So then I would go down the hill. I'd keep on watching her. And when she would stand up, I'd stop and stay still and just stay so that she wouldn't pick up on me. But she would smell me again, and then she'd get my bearings and start towards me again. So that I'd go again. And we did this, I think that little interchange like that, we did that about 5 or 6 times until I got down to my truck. But that was,
Wow.
yeah. And I came back and I was like, wow, oh my God. I actually felt really excited about it.
Oh yeah, that adrenaline really
Yeah.
gets you going, man, for sure.
Nice. And
Yeah.
then that also, every bear encounter after that gave me a certain amount of experience that I could tell, okay, if I do this, I can usually chase them away, or I will extract myself from that situation in a logical way that I won't get hurt, won't get in trouble. So yeah,
Are there
I really do revel in some of those experiences and interactions.
Are there any tips that you would give people if they are, let's say, new to going into the outdoors, whether it's through hiking trails or their own backyard? Are there any tips that you always make sure that you have, or tools that you have with you when you're going outdoors?
Yeah, I do use bear spray. I'm not a gun guy, and I've heard that you probably have almost a better chance with bear spray than you do with a rifle or a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Harming the animal makes them more mad, right?
Yeah.
And they'll associate that with you, and they'll come get you. Anyway, I think the biggest tool is being really aware and being able to identify those the situations that you're in. Situation awareness. If you're aware of everything, I talk to my students about this as, if our ancestors were not hyper aware of everything around them, we wouldn't be here today. If you're going into the woods, you're going into a thick, brushy area, and you notice some bear scat. Oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't go in there. And our ancestors had that. Okay, well, I know that if I was in my head daydreaming and just kind of like la la la, I love this beautiful trees, and not paying attention to any of these signs, then yeah, I'm probably going to have a situation that's going to happen to me that's not good. But if you're aware, you can. All of a sudden I see bear stat, then that raises my attention, my awareness level higher. If it's grizzly bear scat, then it goes a little bit higher. Black bear scat, I can kind of put up with that a bit, but then we get into grizzly bear, and it's like, well, okay, that's a different level. So that awareness, being able to identify these little indicators in the environment around us, that's really important. So experience is important. Being aware of everything, being active, listening, hearing the noises. How far away was that crash? Was that a long ways? Do I have to worry about it? Maybe not. Oh, if that was just right, 10, 15 feet away from me, then you better start really figuring out what you're going to do in that respect. So also being aware of going into a place and how to come back out of that place.
Okay.
Yeah, there's really a lot that goes into making sure you come out of the mountains alive, and the plants they'll tell you a lot what the plants are up to, if it's real thick like you were saying, or what kind of plants are there, maybe if there's a lot of berries. And I've gotten myself into a middle of like stinging nettle, like a huge field of it, and not realized I was in the middle of a field of stinging nettle. And then I had to get out of it, and you kind of get some rashes in that situation. So,
Yeah.
and just knowing the plants, because in some areas the plants can be really toxic, even deadly. So, yeah, awareness does seem to be a critical part of that. But like I was saying, I didn't really know what I was doing. Luckily, I did have some uncles that would take me hunting sometimes, and so I'd learn things with them, or fishing, and I'd learn things with them, and then I'd go out on my own, and I'd have all that in my toolkit with me.
Mhm.
Have you ever had any close calls, like falling or maybe getting too wet and cold or anything like that?
Yeah, I have. On some of my solo jaunts in the Bob Marshall, uh, I know I ran out of water one time, and I wasn't, I was high up in this peak area, and I had to get down low to try to find some area of water. And I started to get sick. I started getting heat exhaustion, and I wanted to throw up. I had a headache really badly, and I really, really had to uh, really, really keep my head together and not panic. And I knew that I had to get back. I had to find water somehow. And I made the mistake of thinking that I had enough water, and I went too far. Um, and 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 I got into a situation where I probably could have perished if I didn't find water in within another half hour or so. And that was pretty scary. And that's actually kind of happened to me. Even that happened to me in an archaeological in eastern Montana too, with Dave and Don Sam. We went out too far, and the water was alkali around us, and we couldn't drink any of it, and we didn't have any filter. And Dave and Don did pretty good, but I was too dehydrated, and I was almost in a similar situation, and I knew it was happening, that it was heat exhaustion. I didn't have enough water in me. Another situation is I was in the Bob Marshall on a solo backpacking trip, and I wasn't watching the trail very well. I was kind of looking at everything around me. Had a heavy pack. I hit a dip in the trail and kind of bent my knee back, hyperextended, I guess you'd say, and camp, and had to find nearby and stay there for days until it healed up on me. Well, it was another great opportunity for me to. I actually did some archaeological survey in that area and found a site next to this lake that I was camped at. So that was fortunate. But I really realized I should have been aware of that trail, and instead of just kind of looking off, it could have been more serious.
Yeah. So I kind of broke up on my end. Maybe it's my internet, because it seems like it happens almost every time. But so you hurt your knee and you had to stay there and heal for a couple days.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can be scary, especially if you don't have enough food and things like that. And did you find anything on your survey?
Yes, I did. I was pretty close to a site that was already classified as an archaeological site, but I went across the creek and I camped over there, and I found another lithic scatter across the creek. And as a matter of fact, it was a grooved stone, granite stone about this big or so, and it had a groove in the middle around the stone there, and it was in the gravels of that little lake. It was Big Salmon Lake back in there, and it was the site was classified as a chert, South Fork chert lithic site, stone tool making site, and there was a lot of whole flakes and chips and flakes of stone tool making, and it's one of the highest concentrations of the South Fork chert was in that area. And that site was classified on one side of the creek. They never did go on the other side, and that's where I camped, on the other side of the creek. And then that's where the site expanded out that farther that way. And that stone tool was there, that grooved mall was there, which is part of another story. I put that stone artifact back in the gravels of the shoreline there and kind of mapped out where it was at. And hopefully I want to go back there to find it again. And such. And so you guys want to go back there and help me find that tool again?
Oh yeah, definitely.
I would. Yeah.
And,
I would
and
love
a
to
tool
find it,
like
yeah.
that is pretty rare. That's a really rare find, isn't it?
It is. When I talked to the Tim Light was the archaeologist at that time for the Flathead National Forest, and he was saying, "Oh my God," he said, "we don't find that in in other parts of the national forest." He said they've never found a grooved mall like that, and it was beautifully made. I have photos of it, and so sometimes you guys want to see the photos, I could show you that too. And it was kind of interesting because on an old map, it showed that the trail went across that creek. An old trail went across that creek and then continued back down to the South Fork of the Flathead River over there. There might be an opportunity to get you guys in the Bob Marshall.
I mean,
oh yeah, any chance I get, I'll go back there.
I have never been, and Casey and Hannah always try to get me. One day, yeah. I want to. Now that I've done a little bit of hiking over here, I've done some mountain hiking. I feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable. Before, was unsure, but I would love to. I think I have learned a lot about Bob Marshall just because of the school that we went to. Also, he had a big part in the Forest Service as well. So I've learned more about him through the Forest Service.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I would love to go to the Bob Marshall.
Well, here's what I'm working on right now is I'm working on getting in the Bob Marshall to do some assessment on the culturally modified trees back in there. Because of the fire suppression, they're burning up because all the fuels are building up around these old growth ponderosa pines that have the scarring on there by our ancestors. And in the year 2003, a considerable amount of them burnt up because of the fires that came through there. And the whole wilderness ethic of no man to be a part of this environment, well, our ancestors were, right? All of our ancestors were. Our Blackfeet ancestors, our Salish, our Pondere and Kootenai people were all part of that forest, that wilderness. And we created the wilderness for what it was before fire suppression. And now I'm proposing that we do some management, active management of those trees and get our tribal members and our other interested people to go up there and hand clear around the fields that are building up around those living artifacts. And I'm building momentum with it. I'm getting some people interested in supporting this effort to get people up there. So I see this also as a project that's going to be ongoing for at least 5 to 10 years because of the amount of scarred trees that are back there and the work that needs to be done. Right now, it was the archaeologist Ryan Powell did float the idea of managing those trees to certain groups of people, civic organizations, wilderness conservation groups, and they don't want to see that happening at all. Now I'm saying because they're using this wilderness perspective, which is a Western world concept. Wilderness is. We were very active in these lands. We created what is there now. So basically, they're using that to exclude man's management. They manage historic cabins, they manage trails, they manage commercial operations that are through there. And they can't, and we can't go back there and manage our culturally modified trees. No, that's not gonna. What's gonna happen, what we need to do now is do some education. So I'm talking to Myrna Dumontier, who is Louis Adams' daughter. And the work that I did in horseback and the elders back in the Bob Marshall, those years back in the early 2000s. Louis Adams was part of that, and I did a lot of interviews. And well, Myrna wants to get her access to her dad's interviews, and we want to make a movie of Louis and the Bob Marshall and the scarred trees, and start doing some education about those trees, and then generating some interest and support to start managing them back there. And so what I'm saying is that I would like to get delegations every year of interested people, tribal members and such, to go back in there and horseback or backpack, and we start clearing around those trees. If not, then we start scarring trees back in there. That's part of our traditional practice, is to extract that cambium, and we'll see how they like that. Right?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. Like, it would be cool to do as a part of that would be to renew that practice. And it was, yeah, that would be, I'm totally down for sure.
All right, Leja, you're on it, man. I want you to get on. I mean, it may not be next year, but maybe the year after, the summer. I think we've got the Bob Marshall Wilderness Foundation has offered to help with getting my youth crew back in there, the Bob Marshall. So, Leja, if you are possibly thinking about joining this youth crew this summer, there's going to be an opportunity to get in the Bob Marshall, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's been like 5 years since I've gone deep. And so that'd be really sweet to get back there again. Because I've noticed it's depending where you go in, it can be a little difficult to get in there. But once you're back there, it's relatively smooth sailing, unless you want to go to like another huge area. But oh man, that sounds perfect.
Yeah. And Annie, I don't want, I want you back in there too. I want more people to experience that back there, because it's just amazing. It's just connecting with that place it's transformed me, every time I go back in there. Mm-hmm. And I think it would transform anyone that we take back up in there.
Yeah,
I'm all for it. Let me know. I'll
okay.
help.
You want to ride a horse? You can hike too.
I'll hike. I'll hike it in.
There's opportunities, because like Ryan Powell said, well, if we don't get you a horse, he said, we'll pack all your gear up there, and all you have to do is just carry a day bag with your lunch and certain supportive gear.
Yeah, so I think I like that idea. Horses are one of those that terrify me. So
it is kind of crazy that people are so comfortable just getting on the back of this huge beast that could just completely destroy you if it really wanted to. And all right, well, we just passed 2 hours, and
wow.
that went by fast. And we have a little bit of a tradition where we ask everybody that we have on the show what your 3 tips would be for being Indigenous in the modern world. And that's kind of a loose concept, but I think everybody kind of gets it. Like, what would your 3 tips be for how you maybe operate, or what would you say to young people that are wanting to retap or tap into these Indigenous roots they have?
Okay. I would say, as on an individual level, that each one should explore their heritage, because all of our ancestors, no matter what race you are, they're indigenous to a place. They had that intimate connection to the environment, and that they can recapture that. They can re-explore that. They can pull that back in. So then it's going back in history. It's going back to your ancestors and how they connected to the environment around them. So one thing is exploring your own heritage and going back to the ancestors that were connected to the landscape on an intimate level. And then, so one is that. The other is connecting to the natural areas around you, because your ancestors was supported by that. We are here because of that connection to the environment. And to be Indigenous is to connect with the environment on that level, as their ancestors did in traditional ways. I mean, you can still connect it with it in contemporary ways, like, I'm going to ride my bike on this trail and make that connection. That's okay too. But also reflecting on your ancestors and what their perspective of that environment. So it is researching your heritage, reaching back to your ancestors is one. Interacting with the natural environment is two, because your ancestors were dependent on that connection, that intimate connection to the environment. Third is being, is cultivating that identity that is you, and owning it and being a part of it, because you don't have anything else, right? To be a part of. You that's who you are in a way, and so some ways you embrace who you are, you own it, you live it, and you be it. You call it, I'm Indigenous, I'm a city, no way, I gotta live in the city, I can't stand it. Well, you call that, he called that, right? I'm gonna call it, I have a connection to this environment around me. I'm going to live it, I'm gonna be a part of it, I'm gonna carry it on. So I don't know what that is. Is that determination, or is that
Making a conscious choice?
Making a conscious choice. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe not letting society make those choices for you.
Exactly.
Wow.
Cool. I'm glad you brought up that word wilderness. We're actually going to do an entire podcast on that within the next few days or so. And yeah,
Nice.
it's an interesting idea, this notion that somehow we're separate from nature or from wild places. And it's so silly to me. And I hear often also people talking about cultural things or societal things as if they're separate from nature somehow. And just from a purely evolutionary biology perspective, culture and social norms, even our own thoughts, our languages, it's all an expression of our biology, of our genetic diversity, and of our genetic fitness. Otherwise, it wouldn't have stuck around for hundreds of thousands of years. So, and I love that what you said about people, we're all indigenous to somewhere. We have indigenous roots, all of us, no matter what race, what country you come from. And so I love that message, and I stand by it. And I think that is a really important message for modern people that don't consider themselves indigenous to really take to heart, because we all are, unless you're from another planet.
Yeah, that extraterrestrial that's been teaching people for thousands of years.
Oh yeah.
I like that.
Cool.
Right
well,
on.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure, man. And I'm really glad to see you again. And I'm glad to hear you're going to Costa Rica.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I'll be thinking about you guys on the beach there.
Was it Puerto Rico or Costa Rica?
Costa Rica. You got it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I'd love to see some pictures of the spheres.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the spheres, man. It's gonna have me thinking.
Yeah, those spheres. Let's come back and we'll talk about them again too. So.
Yes. So after you come back, we'll schedule another episode.
Let's do it. This is fun, you guys. I enjoyed it too.
Yes, and it's always fun.
Yeah.
Cool.
And sorry if I get off in a tangent and I keep on going on and on and on. I should kind of.
No, that's perfect. No, that's why we brought you on, man. You're so easy. You're like one of the best guests we've ever had, because we really didn't have to say much.
No. You answered all of our questions.
Exactly.
Oh, super.
I think that's why a lot of people love you so much, Tim, is you're a really good storyteller, and you just naturally flow into it. So
yes. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate what you're doing too. This is just great stuff. Love it.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. And so just before we head out, is there anything you'd like to tell our audience as far as where to find you, or if any of your upcoming projects?
Yeah, I'm at the Salish Kootenai College here. I am the chair for the Culture and Language program here at the college, and I get a lot of requests to help people with certain questions about culture and the environment. And I am very willing to talk to anyone about that and share my knowledge. So, and if if people want to inquire about contact information, do they
Yeah,
contact
well,
personally?
if you're cool with it, you could just tell people where to find you, how to get in touch with you, and we'll
Yeah,
also
yeah.
put it in our show notes.
Sure, sure. I can give you my email here at the college, which I think is a good way of. I like that rather than phone calls. I think that first initial contact
Mhm.
through the email is good. So you can contact me with by my email, which is my name TIM_RYAN at skc.edu.
All right, great. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Maybe and I mean, we always put as much information as in there as we can. And yeah, I look forward to next time, Tim.
Okay,
Yes, I do
sure
too.
do too.
All right,
Thanks,
cool.
guys.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
see you, everybody. We'll catch y'all on the flip side.